Welcome. Thank you for ordering this great weather, everybody. Is it summer? Hi, I'm Daisha Harwood, the executive director here at the beautiful Santa Barbara Historical Museum. And on behalf of our president, Bill Reynolds, and my dedicated team, welcome. I want to acknowledge in the audience that we have a few trustees with us tonight. Mr. Mark Appleton, Chris Greco, this direction, and Sheila Snow. So, my dear friends, tonight our board and our staff are thinking of someone special. And her name is Eleanor Vencott. She passed away over the weekend. We often refer to Eleanor as the patron saint of the museum, for good reason. She was a wonderful, we'll just call her our gift to the museum. She was a trustee and a wonderful donor and a friend and a force to be reckoned with for those of you that knew her. She was a New Yorker, and she certainly did not have to fall in love with Santa Barbara and Santa Barbara's history, but she did. And so she loved this place, and most importantly, she believed in us. So tonight, I want to do something special, and that is I want you all to raise a glass, please, to our patron saint, Eleanor Vencott. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to remind you that we have two exhibitions happening right now. Huguette Marcel Clark, A Portrait of the Artist. Note that in early June, the museum will host a pop-up display of Ms. Clark's Fiesta attire, so please do come back. Our current exhibition and the topic of tonight, Lockwood de Forest Lighting the Way, is dedicated to Kathleen and Ozzie DeRoss. We honor their service to the community and the wonderful gift of 35 paintings that you see in the exhibition. And I also want to thank John Woodward, who is not here tonight, for his support of the exhibition. And now, Jeremy Tessmer is the gallery director and curator of vintage American art at Sullivan Goss. He's been with the firm for 20 years and has worked in every area of the business, including curation, sales, marketing, and exhibition design. He's played a significant role in the gallery's publication program, helping to produce 19 books and numerous catalogs, including on artists Ray Strong and Hank Pitcher. He's a graduate of UC Santa Barbara and one of our favorite speakers here at the museum. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Jeremy Tessmer.
It's incredible to be here this evening, and I want to start by thanking the board and the staff and all of you for coming out on a very, very warm evening. None of us pay these kinds of prices to experience this kind of heat, so I'm pretty sure we're due a tax deduction of some kind. Lockwood de Forest is the subject of this evening's discussion, and it's incredible to me that I am in any way qualified to speak on this man. I have been working with his artwork now for 20 years, so that is my claim to fame. I had no idea who he was when I started at Sullivan Goss. He is, I think, a very interesting and important artist in American art history, and the tales I'm going to tell you this evening are sort of wild and touch on a lot of different aspects of American history. So if you don't know by now, he was one of the first artists to make Santa Barbara his home. He's really the vanguard of the society artist of the East Coast coming out to Santa Barbara. And then he moved here right at the beginning of Santa Barbara's golden age, which I put at 1915. So he arrives right on schedule, and he stays through the whole thing, including the 1925 earthquake. So one of the things that happens a lot when we talk about Lockwood de Forest is people say, oh, I know his gardens. One of the absolutely maddening things about the de Forest family is that they are creative in all endeavors except for naming. There's only 8 names in the entire de Forest clan. And so Lockwood de Forest begat Henry Grant de Forest, who begat Lockwood de Forest, who begat Lockwood de Forest, who begat Lockwood de Forest? Anyway, one of the trustees here this evening knew Lockie, who was a very small boy, who was Lockwood de Forest Jr., or the third's son, Kellam's brother. Okay. So here I have a timeline for you, just to remind you. Henry Chapman IV gets here in April of 1875. That's very, very early. And then we have Alexander Harmer, and he gets here in the early 1890s. And then Lockwood de Forest is the next major artist. So hopefully you're getting a sense. He gets here right when the railroad gets here. So 1901 is the railroad, de Forest is here the next year. The railroad is tremendously important to the Santa Barbara story, obviously. And then afterwards, we get Fernand Lundgren and Herder, who de Forest almost certainly would have known, and then John Gamble. And then we get the rest of the crew. We get Audie and Pechernikoff and Thomas Moran and Douglas and DeWitt Parshall and Carl Oscar Borg. And then the Santa Barbara School of the Arts opens, and then we get Cooper and Boreen. And that pretty much gets us most of the people we really care about in early Santa Barbara art history. This is a painting from Lockwood de Forest's first trip out here, which occurred in December of 1902. And unfortunately, I don't have images. The gallery's database contains 4 paintings that are before this one. None of them are as pretty, and 2 of them or 3 of them don't have images. But this is December 22nd, 1902, and de Forest's first trip. And this is a painting he made in the year that he moved out here, 1915. And he's already learned what John Gamble's color theory is, which is that beautiful blue against that very warm orange to create this warm-cool balance. So, one of the people in the audience here this evening, an artist we represent named Meredith Brooks Abbott, lent us this paint box, which was used by Lockwood de Forest. All of these paintings that you will see inside are this wide. If you put your shoulders out, and you're not a football player, you get a Lockwood de Forest aspect ratio. And in fact, he had a whole strange theory about how that was the ideal size for transcribing nature without as much interpretation. So he could paint 2 or 3 or 4 paintings because they're on something about the thickness of maybe a credit card. And we call it oil on artist cardstock, but in fact, another way to think about it might be Academy board. And so here's the man himself. And so you can see he's got a little stool, and he's got his little paint box, and he's sitting by the railroad tracks, probably in Palm Springs, making a painting. And so who is this guy? We have to go back a second. Lockwood de Forest is descended from a man named Jesse de Forest. And if we were all in New York City, this would be a tremendously important name. Because Jesse de Forest was what's called a French Huguenot. And that means that he was Protestant, but French. And he lived in the border between the Dutch Calvinists and the French Catholics, which was an extremely dangerous place to be. And after, 100 years of war, he decided that he didn't want to be there anymore. And so he got together a group of families, and he said, let's all move to the New World. And this is very important. They signed in a circle so that nobody would be on top. And to this day, it's called the Round Robin document, and it's in Battery Park at the southern end of Manhattan. This is a monument. It's 10 feet tall. It was erected to commemorate the founding of the New Amsterdam colony, what we call Manhattan today. So it's a very prestigious name in old New York. De Forest is the middle child. And here you see some of the names, and they repeat endlessly. Robert Weeks de Forest, who has the middle name of his mother's family. Lockwood is named after his grandfather. Julia is named after her mother's mother. Henry is named after his father's mother, Henry Wheeler. Now, all of these people are sort of significant. The Weeks family established the New York Stock Exchange. Robert Weeks de Forest married a woman whose father was the first president of the Metropolitan Museum. He was the third president of the Metropolitan Museum after this guy named J.P. Morgan. Literally considered one of the most important people of his generation. And so poor Lockwood had this older brother who was tremendously successful. Everybody went to Yale, and they had this big law firm called Weeks and de Forest. And if you needed your money managed, Weeks and de Forest is where you went, okay? Including, by the way, this little family called the Sedgwick family. So in the 19th century, Weeks and de Forest would manage the Sedgwick money. And much, much, much later, Alice de Forest, the daughter of Henry Wheeler de Forest, married Frances Sedgwick and gave us Edie Sedgwick, Andy Warhol's factory girl. She too was a de Forest. So that's who the de Forests are. I want to talk a little bit too about when he was born. So he's born in 1850. And there's a couple things that are really important. One is Henry David Thoreau wrote on Walden Pond, wrote Walden or Life in the Woods. It's a sort of call to arms for a new way of living, which is radical simplicity, total solitude and immersion in nature as a spiritual path for human beings. And Lockwood de Forest pretty much follows this his whole life through. The other thing, which is really kind of a sort of pet theory of mine, I'm not sure if it'll hold any water, you can decide. Right around the time that Lockwood de Forest is born, the American Horological Company becomes the Waltham Watch Company. And when Lockwood de Forest is 7 years old, they patent standardized parts inside the production of a pocket watch. And suddenly, everyone's got a pocket watch. And I mean for 70 years, the model 1857 pocket watch was standard fare across the United States. And so suddenly, life is not measured in days and seasons the way it was for farmers. It's measured in minutes. And Lockwood de Forest tried his whole life to escape that watch. Okay, being of some status and the family had some money, they were not in Mrs. Astor's 400. I just finished The Gilded Age on HBO, and I was very disappointed that no de Forests were represented. But it turns out they were just at the periphery of that. But still, they took their kids on the grand tour, both when Lockwood was 14 and when he was 19. When he was 19, he started to study with this painter, a man named Herman Corrady. And if you look very closely at this painting, you will see elements that will be familiar to all of Lockwood de Forest's early production. Corrady ended up painting for a lot of the European monarchy, including Queen Victoria. But he was only 24 years old, teaching an 18-year-old when Lockwood encountered him. Now, this is the same trip when Lockwood de Forest made this painting. He's 19 years old, and he gets a telegram from Frederick Church, who is the most famous American artist in the world and the wealthiest American artist in history. And Frederick Church is coming back from the Holy Land and says, hey, why don't we meet in Rome and I'll show you around, and then we'll go to Greece and we'll paint together. That's a pretty good gig if you're an aspiring artist. So both of de Forest's brothers went to Yale. His dad went to Yale. His grandfather went to Yale. De Forest dropped out of Columbia because the math was too hard. So he had to find an alternate path in life. And so here he is at 19 years old, painting a ruin that symbolizes the lost old world, where nobody had watches. This is a painting from the same trip by Frederick Church. So in case you think de Forest is particularly sketchy, there's de Forest, there's Church. And this is the painting that anchors the Metropolitan Museum's 19th century room. It is a huge painting by Frederick Church, worked up from a sketch done on the same trip as Lockwood de Forest. So when they get back to the United States, Lockwood pretty much moves in with Church, okay? So you can see that the final Church painting and the Lockwood painting have the exact same view. So they are standing shoulder to shoulder when he's 19. And this is what de Forest gets his first real education outside of Columbia. He goes to this place called Alana, which is like a made-up word for a Persian treasure house that Frederick Church was building up on the hills in the Catskills. And what's so fascinating about this, Church actually didn't sell paintings, he charged money to look at them. So between 5 and 25 cents in a time when that was very serious money, like Broadway show money, you could go in and sit with a brilliantly lit Frederick Church painting. And this is what that business model buys you. This is an interior. It was stuffed to the gills with exotic materials from all around the world. And Lockwood de Forest is going through the library and he's learning all about Orientalist design, Islamic design. He's very curious about applied arts because he is the son of wealth and they don't really want an artist. Maybe if Lockwood can become like Uncle Frederick, but otherwise they would prefer for him to get a real job. Here he is just 4 years later, and look at how incredible his progress is, right? So it's kind of an amazing picture, and it shows you already that de Forest is observing a lifelong convention. It's dated to the day, July 10th, 1873. De Forest mostly dated his paintings to the day, which is a very strange thing to do unless you're trying not to live life by the minute, but by the day, okay? In 1874, he paints his first moonlight painting. And in my estimation, he is the third or fourth most prolific nocturne painter in the United States, which is an incredible thing because he was not a specialist. Other people were specialists. The same year he painted this was the year of Frederick Church's most famous moonlight painting called Twilight in the Tropics. So this is the earliest one we've ever seen. It's October 26th, 1874. Now, how does Lockwood get so good? Well, we're going to learn. Partly, he is relentless about traveling and painting. So in 1876, he recaps his mentor's trip up the Nile and across the Holy Land. And inside, you'll see this little study, which is January 7th, 1876, and this studio painting, which we think is about 1876. So you may know the British opened the Suez Canal, 1862. Suddenly Americans can go to the Holy Land, right? We can all get there pretty quickly. A couple years later, he goes back and paints the Parthenon again. And now he's painting sketch-style paintings, but exhibition size, so 12.5 by 18 inches. And here's another one. This is a period in which Lockwood de Forest is falling in love with both the desert and with Orientalism. This painting, in fact, is known in a book called American Orientalists. And so in about 1990, that book came out and set everybody's kind of hair on fire about this whole movement that we can also see inside in Huguette Clark's work, where she's painting kimonos and Japanese scrolls and that sort of thing. So here's another studio painting from that same trip. And here's how Lockwood really figures it all out. This is the 10th Street studio building. This is a wonderful idea. If any of you have a lot of capital and would like to change the world for the better, Once upon a time, a very bright person thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was one building where the top artists of the United States could work together? And then we'll build a big hall in the center where they can all meet and greet. And that's what they did. And when you look at the list of who was in that building, the only important artist of the 19th century who wasn't in the building is Thomas Moran. So Lockwood was there 1872 to 1883. Here's one of his buddies, Jervis McKenty, who was also in the 10th Street studio building, was also a very brief student of Frederick Church's. And you can see the painting looks a little bit like Lockwood de Forest. There's some scumbled paint technique, but there's figures. Lockwood doesn't really like people as much as Jervis does. Here's another guy, goes on to be a business partner of de Forest named Sanford Gifford. You'll notice how the sky is painted, the reflection in the water. This is what's called a luminist painting. And it's an extraordinary example. De Forest gets into business with Sanford Gifford 7 years after this painting is painted, but they meet inside the 10th Street studio building. This is his best friend. He wrote paintings, or wrote letters to Walter Lont Palmer constantly all the way up and down his trip to the Nile. And so we have a complete list of everywhere he went and all of the things he thought. The only thing he didn't like about Egypt is the concept of bakshish, which is like miniature bribes / tips that you have to pay. And his Yankee sensibility was deeply offended. This is Albert Bierstadt, also in the 10th Street studio building, maybe inspired Lockwood de Forest to go west, right? Winslow Homer is in that building, paints this painting in the Metropolitan Museum the year that de Forest arrived, Snap the Whip. William Merritt Chase is in this building. This is a slightly later painting, which I much prefer to the work he was doing when Lockwood was there, but he's in the building. And this is Martin Johnson Head, who travels all the way to South America to capture these wild orchids and sets the idea of a traveling artist as a business model for how you can make your way. So all of these people are working in a very small space with Lockwood de Forest early in his development. So about this time, Lockwood de Forest's mother says, I have a friend and she wants to teach women to make a living in the decorative arts. Would you help her? And so Lockwood joins the Society for Decorative Arts in 1877 as an instructor. Samuel Coleman does the same thing, and so does Louis Comfort Tiffany. And it only takes about 2 years before they realize, okay, we should form a company, and they do. And essentially, this company takes over from the Herder Brothers as the most elite interior design firm in the United States. So just a quick client list: the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, Mark Twain, President Chester Arthur, Bryn Mawr, a secret society at Yale, of course, you've got to have that. They do the Park Avenue Armory. And de Forest's role in all of this is to procure exotica from around the world. Fortunately, he is married to DuPont. So, Meta Kemble is the daughter of Victorine DuPont, who marries Kemble. And so, with their money, they go on honeymoon to India in 1881. And of course, they hook up with John Kipling, Rudyard Kipling's father. Because if you're going to be in India, you want to be with a Kipling. And Lockwood travels around, and he goes on a buying spree, the likes of which the world has never seen. Basically, what's going on is that the English have moved the whole center of commerce to Bombay, and all of the historic merchant class have chased them. They've abandoned their ancestral homes. And so Lockwood's looking around, and he's like, all this carved teak, nobody's living here? And they're like, no. And he said, okay, well, I mean, it looks kind of shop-worn, but I'll give you some money for it. And then he wires Tiffany, and he says, we're going to put this stuff in every wealthy place in America. which is what they do. And not only does Lockwood think this is a good business idea, he also sort of prizes this hand-working ability that these Indian craftspeople have. It's really, so he starts a factory. He finds a local caste of Jain merchants, the Hudson Singhs, and he sets them up in business. What's crazy is today this is a billionaire family in India. Same family. But this is their modest little factory at the start. And he goes around making little paintings and buying things. And in fact, his wife, I think, is the first American woman to see Nepal full stop. She was like not very tall. Not very tall. They carried her up in a basket. So this is an example of what Lockwood de Forest was building out of all this. This is a chair he had carved in India and plated in brass. It's at the Metropolitan Museum. Hearst owned a pair just like this, and about 7 years ago, they went up for sale. They made $250,000 for 2 chairs, neither of which any of us would want to sit on. This is at least a comfortable looking chair in the collection of the Met. So this was a huge business for de Forest for many, many years. And it's why the family really didn't think of his painting career as the most important thing he'd done, because they were selling these to big ticket families. About 7 years ago when my son was born, I got to go back on the company's nickel to see the Cooper Hewitt Museum is Carnegie's old mansion, and Lockwood de Forest did the whole library for Mr. Carnegie. And American Express paid through the nose to restore it all to its original condition, and I was there for an academic conference. And this was the title of the show, Passion for the Exotic, Lockwood de Forest, Louis Comfort Tiffany, and Frederick Church. And these are personal photos. I apologize that they're not in better focus, but you can see what it looks like. All the walls are stenciled, all of the moldings are carved. The phrase gilding the lily doesn't really begin to cover it. This is a gift that the Hudson Singh family made for Lockwood de Forest, and it's an ivory carving of Meta Kemble. I thought it was just so beautiful. And that's the entrance to Mr. Carnegie's library. So this is like big time stuff, right? Lockwood de Forest became probably the preeminent purveyor of this kind of material in the late 19th century when eclectic was cool and exotic was cool. And he had a showroom that he built for himself. This is the last, or best surviving example of associated artists. It's the Veterans Room at the Park Avenue Armory. And it was just restored in 2015 by Herzog and Moron. It's something else to see that building, let me tell you. So there's Lockwood de Forest's other house. Today, it's part of the NYU campus, but the whole front facade is in carved teak. And that's where he would have sold you a whole home's worth of this material. One of the places where they sold their wares was at the Chicago World's Fair. I always show this slide because I bet that Lockwood de Forest saw the California Building. This is a poster of the California Building. If you look at the edge of the building, you will see our mission. That's right. Right? So, and I know the de Forests, he sold out of that exhibition, and there was a book a while back called Devil in the White City about this fair, and in the opening sequence of the book, de Forest is one of the principal organizers and financiers of this whole endeavor. Okay. That whole business goes bust at the end of the century. It's fashion, and it just goes out of fashion. And so Lockwood de Forest sells his whole stock, and he comes out to Santa Barbara, and he starts making paintings out here, and he really redevotes himself to his painting career. This painting is December 20th, 1902, and it's the creeks in the Mission. And you'll have seen another in the exhibition that's also of rocks in Mission Creek. Part of why we love this guy is because he gives us views that don't exist. This is the lagoon in Santa Barbara, which just doesn't exist. Unless you live on Laguna and we have an earthquake, and then we'll find out if it still exists. Here's a nocturne that I've always particularly liked. This shows a little bit of the road going past Castle Rock at night. And everything that is romantic is in this. There's solitude, there's quiet, there's the power of nature, and simplicity. De Forest is all about simplicity. He makes all of these paintings in about 3, 4, 5 hours. So, and the nocturnes all by available light. So he doesn't have a flashlight. So he would pre-mix his colors on his palette, and then he would know where to go on the palette to paint what is in front of him by moonlight. This is the Carpinteria Marsh. It's another one of my favorite paintings. And this gets to be a theme of De Forest's. One of the things you'll notice is these are fairly modernish paintings. He would have hated me saying that. But I think in some ways De Forest's work is more relevant today than it would have been at the outset. And this is one of the last paintings he ever did, 1927, and it's almost modern. So certainly very reductive, not a lot of details, a lot of abstraction in it. This is a painting of Monterey. So De Forest really heeds the traveling artist business model, and he paints a lot of California. Monterey, you may know, is another important site of California art. Not as important as Santa Barbara. No, it's just not. I mean, talk to me afterwards. But they do have one cool claim to fame, which is that the first gallery ever devoted to California art was at the Hotel Del Monte in Monterey. So De Forest showed in that venue, and Charles Rollo Peters was the curator, the jury. So here's another studio painting. One of the things that's really fabulous about what you have inside, by the way, that's an unbelievable amount of studio paintings that the curators here have assembled. Honestly, I'm so glad you're here. You will never see this many again. In 20 years, I think I've seen 15 of them. So we think De Forest made about 3,000 paintings, and we think maybe 100 are studio paintings, and a number of them aren't very good and or have not survived. So here's another of the Grand Canyon, also a studio painting. But what's interesting is this is almost certainly blown up from an earlier sketch. He can't totally remember everything that's in there, so it's even more minimal than his usual canvases. But here he is working from life. So this is a studio painting of Montecito looking out towards Rincon Peak. And all the way down into Mexico. So one of his brothers is president of the Met. The other is chairman of the board of the Southern Pacific Railroad. It's a tough gig, a tough sibling rivalry with this guy. But the travel was cheap, I bet. This is Lockwood de Forest's local house up at 1815 Laguna Street. In case the owners are here, I hope you don't mind. I stole it off of a real estate site, but it's, I really don't mean to get into people's business, but this is a very uncommon view because you actually have to be beyond a gate to see this, and you can see that same carved teak. When you see it from the street, it's very hard to tell that that was Lockwood de Forest's house. And the thing you have to know is it looked straight down that lagoon when Lockwood de Forest built it. And he could paint from the roof. And in fact, there is a book with a picture of him sitting up there on the roof looking down over the lagoon. So it's not a bad life. This is a wonderful family picture and shows kind of the whole extended family in Rocky Nook Park. And so this is one of the strange things about my life. I don't know this much about my family. I've just become kind of a Lockwood de Forest devotee, like the chief groupie, over the last 20 years. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how this story has changed over time. When I was born, 1976, the Heckscher Museum had the first posthumous show of Lockwood de Forest, the second. The Faulkner Gallery had the first, a memorial exhibition in 1933. The second was at the Heckscher Museum, and Mrs. Frances Sedgwick and Alice de Forest helped organize it. And they produced a publication. And so it began. And then the Alaska State Museum did one in 1988. And then Richard York Gallery, which was a boutique firm on the Upper East Side, did one in 2000. And that's what really changed the DeForest market, because at that time, Sullivan Goss would sell these paintings for between $5,000 and $10,000. But Richard York said, I can't have anything in my gallery that inexpensive. It's 15 grand and up from here. And he sold out a lot of the exhibition. And so suddenly, that's the market for Lockwood de Forest paintings. And the essay was written by Joseph Goldine, and they were shown around Frederick Church paintings, which was totally appropriate. And then in 2008, a woman named Roberta Meyer wrote her dissertation on Lockwood de Forest and put the Met chair on the catalog. And then we did five books. And now most of the museums are very happy to acknowledge that Lockwood de Forest was an important artist. That's all it took. It just took 30, 40 years, and a whole shelf of books. But this evening's show is definitely part of this story, so I'm very grateful that you did the show. That's my story for you this evening. You all were very kind. And if any of you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. Yes? Yes.
It was unusual to me because it's from the view from west looking east, and I've never seen that view. Every picture I've ever seen of Castle Rock is from the east looking west. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? DeForest is the sort of man who would have gone to Paris and ignored the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre. And if he'd gone to Yosemite, he would have painted a tree and not Bridalsville. He had a sort of mortal fear of what we'll call the tourist shot, you know? He was, and it's very interesting. All the places in the world, he goes to India, he doesn't really paint the Taj Mahal. Who does that? Lockwood de Forest does. No. That slide's not backwards. That's Lockwood de Forest for you. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Where's the Heckscher Gallery?
It's in Long Island. Yeah.
How did you distinguish between the studio and the plein air paintings?
A size. So, yeah, basically Lockwood de Forest experimented with 3 sizes of plein air paintings. He started with very small paintings. They would be about this big, about 7.5 by 12. Then he got to his standard 9.5 by 14. And at one point, as I showed you, he tries the 12.5 by 18. And I believe those are done on site, but there are very few of them, maybe 20, 30, 40 of them. Yeah. So, and all the rest of them, you see, Church is his mentor, and Church only paints outside to get the effects, to get the real color of the sky. The details of scenes he does by pencil on paper. And because Lockwood was just not as gifted a detail guy as Church, he really realized early on, I'm better doing these little painterly evocations. His color's better, and arguably, if it's a quick evocative stroke, he's in the ring with Church. And Church, by the way, is the Tiger Woods and the Michael Jordan of the American art world. That guy was so talented that his other very religious friends thought that God was like literally messing with them to have put Church on earth. When he got old, he got arthritis in his painting hand, and he did the same level of detail with his left hand. I mean, so fortunately, De Forest got out of that ring very, very early in his career and just said, okay, this is what I'm good at. And so most of his exhibition career are smaller paintings like the ones we see inside. Those bigger paintings that are inside are for major exhibitions like the Chicago World's Fair or, yeah, that kind of thing, the Paris Universal Exposition.
So, do you know where a lot of his art has gone? Do you really, do people understand where it went and you can trace it? Or is it, a lot of it is lost?
Well, my predecessor, Frank Goss, is a very, 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 very bright man, and he loved a spreadsheet. That was his real art form. And Frank has a spreadsheet with a complete genealogy from Lockwood de Forest, the second going down, with piece totals ascribed. One of the interesting things is because the family just did not think this was an important part of his production, this is how they chose which paintings they got. One for you, 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 one for you. Honest to goodness, they just put them in stacks. And then those stacks got divided into stacks and got divided into stacks. One of the funny little stories, at one point, we financed all these books on the discovery of about 240 new Lockwood de Forests. And they were in rural New Hampshire, and it was a very obscure connection to de Forest. She had a 1900 hand-chased, hand-worked set of wedding silver for Lockwood and Meta, rotting away in the basement. I think it was like a service for 20. I mean, it brought a small fortune, and she could not have cared less about it. So imagine how she felt about the paintings. But her heir really did, because she ended up working with us. And some of you will remember we did a show called 40 Days and 40 Nights right around that time, and it was a massively successful exhibition and really kind of put Lockwood de Forest back into the public eye in our community in a very profound way. Anybody else? Yes?
Jeremy, why is it that he particularly liked the southern coastal view of Rincon Ridge? Rincon Ridge appears all the time.
It sure does, doesn't it? I don't know. The only thing I can guess, in the history of the Hudson River School, which he's sort of considered a third generation painter in, the mountains are very important, right? So Kindred Spirit is by Asher Durand at the Crystal Bridges Museum. Is Asher and his mentor looking out over they're on a promontory looking out at the mountains. De Forest owned a church painting that's very famous called Twilight in the Wilderness, mountains with a sunset. It's just kind of a major part of the vocabulary in the same way that in California Impressionism, we like eucalyptus trees, we like poppies, we like purple shadows. I mean, there get to be these sort of market-driven conventions in art, I think. Yes?
Could you elaborate a little bit on the DeRoss family accumulating this whole wonderful collection?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I had heard that it had happened. I was shocked to see what he'd accumulated. And so what I'm not totally clear on, and maybe you can answer for me, did DeRoss get these from Lockwood III, or did he get them from Kellum? Does anybody know?
Aaron, has
gifted them a couple, like 2 or 3.
Right.
And then Ozzy and Kathleen would give each other the paintings for anniversaries, Christmas, over the, ensuing years.
But they would buy them from
At the, probably Kellum after.
probably Kellum. That explains it. Yeah. So I mean, again, 3,000 paintings. The thing you have to understand about the way that de Forest does these, they are painted on a paper stock. You cannot turpentine these paintings. Every stroke you see is in the exact color and in the exact stroke that he laid down on his first try. So everybody getting that? These, when they're good, they are virtuoso first drafts. When they are bad, it is completely understandable. And so my guess is that of 3,000 paintings, somewhere between 400 or 500 are really worth our time today, to be honest. I mean, some of them are just a little awkward. Others are so minimal that only a true modernist would really, really want to own a painting like this. There's one painting I should have put in my slideshow where he just does, and it's like the intimation of sea foam receding into the sand. I mean, come talk to me. I think we still have that painting for some reason, but.
On the other hand, his use of those bare limbs and those eucalyptus trees
Right.
is really quite, and the sycamore trees,
Right.
is really quite remarkable.
Oh, absolutely. He has a very good hand, and for color, I think he's outrageously good. And just, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Yes.
Where is the other largest collection of this painting housed? Is it spread out all over the country?
Well, there are family members with significant collections, like hundreds of paintings. Yeah, and if any of you have been to the Met, there is a large classical building off the sculpture courtyard, okay? And inside are all of these period rooms from American history. That building was given by Robert de Forest, Lockwood de Forest's older brother. The whole building. And so, although Lockwood had plenty of money, his older brother had a lot more money. And so some of the grandchildren aren't going to need to, I mean, part of what's so unusual about this whole story is usually when an artist dies, within a generation, things start coming out because people need the money. With the de Forest family, they just really didn't. It wasn't until the grandchildren. And they just got to where it's like, okay, we have all the paintings we want. We can let go of some. There are enough. And so that's really when Sullivan Goss got involved. Kellum de Forest walked in when Frank opened his store and said, my grandfather was a painter, and here's a painting, would you like to buy it? And that'll be $500. And Frank said, okay. And he gave him a check for $500. And he took it to a framing store, not a nice one. And he put a $100 frame on it. And he brought it back into the gallery, put a $1,200 sticker on it, and hung it on the wall. And the first day, a woman walked in and said, I'd like that, please. And Frank said, I love the art business. This is the best business ever. And also, Kellum, do you have any more of those paintings? But to his credit, Kellum got wise. He's like, well, how much did you sell that for? And so over time, they did get more expensive for the gallery to buy. But yeah, that's the story of how we got them. As 1994, Kellum de Forest sold Frank Goss his first Lockwood de Forest. Yes?
Just a little bit about Kellum and the collection. When I first met Kellum, he had all of those paintings in a trunk. And it was just, they were just paintings in a trunk. It wasn't anything really special. He would come around by the house and say, Neil, want to take a look at these? There's something of Mission Creek, or there's something of downtown. So he would just bring this trunk around with all these paintings in it, and they weren't, preserved in any manner. They were just stacked together. And he had 2 or now realizing how much they have increased in value since then, it's like I could have bought a lot more.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's true that did they have the black matte paper between them, that photo paper? No, not even that.
They were just sitting in a trunk.
So some of them have really gone the way of all things because of how they were stored. Yes.
Those trunks were in my studio for quite a few years. And they were being stored. And I never went through them because it wasn't my business.
Really?
But I wonder how many of those paintings went to Australia, Lockwood de Forest.
The fourth.
Because he just died a couple years ago.
I was always under the impression that Locke got his own bequest. I mean, de Forest was marking time with these. He would do sometimes 2 or 3 paintings in a day, but usually 1 painting in a day. 3,000 paintings. And so, I mean, the funny thing is what do you even, if you're the family, what do you even do with that, Given that your family helped, found Manhattan and start the New York Stock Exchange. It doesn't seem like the primary asset, I think, for the family. Right. Yes, sir.
When did he reach any form of international prominence? Because, coming from Europe, I sort of followed art when I was a boy. And I really hadn't heard very much about him until I actually came here. So was he known internationally or typically American?
I would say no, is the short answer. He did have work in the 1876 South Kensington exhibition, where there was a huge amount of Raj material. And he would have been the least important name on the roster at that time, but Kipling got him in. Besides that, I think the decorative art side, he's known. People pay small fortunes for those things. But the paintings, the thing you have to understand is American art as a discipline is only about 50 years old. One of the art historians I got to meet in my career told me this story about everybody sitting in a room, and everybody who was formational in my field was in that room. And they sat around, these academics, and said, should American art history be a thing? Because the Europeans said, well, it's bad European art is what American art is. And they were trying to decide whether or not it should be a thing. And they decided that it should. And this is in the late 60s. And apparently in 1976 with the American Bicentennial, interest skyrocketed. And some of you will remember early American furniture came back, and Hudson River School painting came back. And so the story of, and that first show at the Heckscher is 1976. So the story of Lockwood de Forest's rediscovery is also the discovery of American art writ large. Right. Yes?
So they have his decorative arts at the Met, but do they have any of his paintings?
No. No. Another sort of funny story, though, about that. So when I was in New York in 2015, a whole bunch of very brilliant and highly credentialed curators got up and talked to me about Lockwood de Forest. One of them was from the Met, and he was the Southeast Asian curator. And he told us a funny story about how when he was first hired, he was still young like I am, he had come from geology. And he's down in the basement, and he's learning the collection at the Met of Southeast Asian artifacts. And he finds this bracelet, ceremonial bangle or something like that. And he says, hey, why aren't we showing this? And they said, well, it's not really good enough. And he said, well, the gem weight in this thing makes it good enough. And they said, what do you mean? Those aren't real. And he said, no, I'm a geologist first and an art historian second. And this is a sapphire and this is a ruby. And this is a very valuable thing. Okay. That is now considered the best object of its type in the world. The British Museum has the second best one of its type. The Met has the best. And it was given by Lockwood de Forest. Now, here's the reason I told that really wonderful story. His older brother, Robert de Forest, was president of the Met, and he would only give him a tiny profit on his purchase so that nobody could ever accuse them of nepotism. If he just paid the market rate on the gems, it would have been worth a lot more. And maybe that helps explain why Lockwood de Forest is not in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for his paintings, even though his older brother built a whole building to showcase decorative arts.
I have another question.
Yes.
About our National Gallery. Do they have any, either decorative or any?
They have decorative arts.
Church of the Buddha?
They do. They have decorative arts by de Forest. This story is unwinding. A good portion of this story has happened in my career. I was 26 when I was hired at Sullivan Goss. I'm 46 now. And it takes the art world a while to kind of move around. I mean, eventually, if we could find the right piece, the Met might take it at this point. He's had 2 or 3 shows in New York in the last 5 or 6 years by very prominent American dealers. Yeah. Does that cut it? Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, so much. Thank you guys all so much for being here. I want to just quickly mention, because Callum de Forest's name was mentioned several times tonight, as it should be, that his daughters gave the Gledhill Library an album of family photos, and many of them are actually showcased in the exhibition. So thank you, Jeremy, for introducing us to the story of Lockwood de Forest, and thank you guys all so much for being here.